All right. Thank you ever so much for joining us for the first installment of the Black History Month Salon series that the Descendants Association has offered this month. Uh, this particular installment is focused on meeting the authors, specifically those individuals who have published books regarding Jesuit enslavement in America. And also, I want everyone to understand that each of the speakers here has taken the time to prepare a presentation that will last about 30 to 45 minutes, and then there will be a question and answer period. In order to ensure that there are no interruptions or wardrobe malfunctions, please turn off your cameras and also mute yourselves for the duration of the speaker's presentation. You can turn your cameras and your speakers and your microphones back on once the speaker has opened up the floor to questions, if that is all right. Okay. And today with us, we have 4 speakers in total. And the first speaker is going to be our founding genealogist, Patricia Bayonne-Johnson. And for those who don't know, I am Shannon Christmas, the Genetic Genealogist Program Director for the organization. And as I stated, our first speaker of the day will be Patricia Bayonne-Johnson, our founding genealogist, followed by Mr., or should I say Dr. C. Walker Gollar, author of Let Us Go Free, Slavery and Jesuit Universities in America. Then we will have a short break, after which we will hear from William G. Thomas III, or should I say Dr. William G. Thomas III, author of A Question of Freedom, of Families Who Challenged Slavery from the nation's founding to the Civil War. After yet another break, we will then hear from Rachel L. Swarns, author of The 272, of families who were enslaved and sold to build the American Catholic Church. Before we hear from our authors, we will now hear our opening message from our founding genealogist, Patricia Bayonne-Johnson.
Well, good morning to all. Got a frog in my throat. I guess, I'm sitting on a pillow, so this is kind of the best I can do. And my chair is up as high as it would go. Well, I want to welcome you to the inaugural Black History Month virtual Salon series presented by the Jesuit Descendants Association Certified Descendant Committee. I'm hoping this is an annual event, and yeah, I would like to see that happen. I'd like to see that we do this every year in February. Give us something to do. Okay, I am Patricia Bayonne-Johnson, and I descend from the Butlers and the Scotts, and for a total of 6 people. I want to share a little bit about my family. We are a big family of Roman Catholics. Both of my grandfathers are Catholic, married to Baptist women. In interfaith marriages, when one of the spouses is Catholic, church doctrine required that all children be baptized Catholic. As a result, everyone in my family began life as a Catholic, and many are still practicing today. This story focuses on my maternal family, particularly my grandfather, Nays Hicks, and my grandmother, Willie Estes Hicks. The Hicks family attended St. Monica Catholic uh, church and school. My mother and one of her sisters attended graduated from Xavier University Preparatory School, now St. Catherine Drexel Preparatory School. And my mother attended Xavier University for a couple of years. St. Catherine Drexel found all of those schools. When my mother was in the 8th grade at St. Monica, she was chosen to read her composition, Building for Eternity, for St. Catherine Drexel, who was visiting that day. When my mother was about to turn 80, her younger sister, Anita, gave her an early birthday gift, a trip to the canonization of Mother Catherine Drexel. Anita accompanied her to Rome, and she thoroughly enjoyed the trip of a lifetime. That was the first time she had ever been on an airplane. It was the first time she had been out of the country. And indeed, she didn't really want to participate because she was afraid of the airplanes. But my daughter accompanied her to New York from New Orleans, and so she was okay with that. I'm just saying all of this because I want you to know that we are a big Catholic family, and it's been in our family for generations. We don't know anything else. In the summer of 2004, the Hicks family planned a reunion in New Orleans. My aunt, Onita, and I were co-chairs. I researched the family, and Onita was the organizer. Everybody participated. I did as much research as I could, but I hired Judy Riffle, professional genealogist, to assist me in the study of the Hicks family of Iberville Parish, Louisiana. The Estes are from Mississippi, and Ms. Riffle does not research in that state. Ms. Riffle lives in Baton Rouge near the Louisiana State Archives and the Diocese of Baton Rouge. They know her when she walks in the building. She has been there so many times that they are on a first name basis. When traveling to the location where one's ancestors are held is impossible, or you just don't have the time or the money, hiring a genealogist becomes the best option. Judy Riffle was that expert. She specialized in researching the parishes where my ancestors were enslaved. I met Judy Riffle at one of the little mini talks that she had at that Whitney Museum in Louisiana. And I first hired her to help me with my Bayonne research. And I chose her because I had been using her books at the family search history, family history search building, and I was using her books, and I saw that her books contained the names, a transcription contained the names of some of my ancestors. So I hired her to help me with the Hicks reunion. On March 19, 2004, I mailed Ms. Riffle 10 documents for examination: a pedigree chart, censuses, baptismal and burial records. She went to the courthouse in Plaquemine, Ville Parish, Louisiana. She found an inventory for the late Jesse Beatty, mortgages for the Beatty heirs and the barrels, and the most crucial document, Thomas Milady's bill of sale for 64 Negroes. These documents created a paper trail leading from my great-great-great-grandparents and their children from a plantation in Louisiana to St. Inigo, a Jesuit plantation in St. Mary County, Maryland. A notation regarding the birthplace of Rachel Butler Hicks' parents led to the discovery of her mother grandparents, aunt, uncle, and their last slaveholder. When Miss Whipple noticed that Rachel's parents were born in Maryland on the 1910 U.S. federal census for Iberville Parish, she researched the records of Jesse Beatty of Terrebonne Parish, who owned a plantation in Bayou, Maryland. She knew from prior research experiences that in 1838, Jesse Beatty purchased many enslaved people from Maryland. She located these records, copied them, and sent them to me. Ms. Riffle located 4 documents that led to the Jesuit enslavement of my ancestors. The late Dr. Jesse Beatty inventory is dated 5th, March 5th, 1851. Rachel had not been born yet, but her mother, Mary, her grandparents, Nathan B.B. Butler, and 9 of their children were on the inventory. The following document Ms. Riffle found was the bill of sales, January 18, 1853, of the Butler by the Beatty's heirs to Washington Barrow and his son, and Mary Butler, and her daughter Rachel Nason B.B. Butler, and their children and grandchildren were part of that sale. On February 4th, 1856, Washington Barrow sold the plantation to Patrick and Joseph B. Woolfolk. The Butlers were included in that sale. Rachel was now 3 years old. Miss Riffle found a bill of sales for 64 Negroes on the 10th of November, 1839, which is a era. It's really 1838, but it's written on the record. It's 1839. Thomas Mulady sold 64 Negroes to Jesse Beatty of Terrebonne Parish. That's in Louisiana. Nace Butler was positioned as the head of the following slaves, who appears to be his wife, and their 9 children. BB, 45, and her children, Caroline, 16, Basil, 14, Martha Ann, 12, Ann, 10, Gabe, 9, BB, and I've seen her that BB as written as BB Ann. She was 8, Henry, 7, Tom, 15, Mary, 3. Mary is the mother of Rachel Butler Hicks. Mary is my great-great-grandmother, and Rachel is my great-grandmother. This transaction occurred in Georgetown while the slaves were on the plantation. I shared the report with my Aunt Juanita, and she discovered the Jesuit plantation, otherwise known as JPP, documents. The JPP is a record of the plantations that form part of the archives of the Jesuit Maryland province and has been converted to an electronic format by the students of the American Studies Department at Georgetown University. The archives contain personal papers like the diaries of Dr. Moberly, Brother Moberly, who spent time on several plantations. It also contained the sale contract of 272 slaves in 1838, documents regarding plantation conditions, the welfare and religious needs of the enslaved, a resource chronology, and a JPP bibliography. This document is no longer on the internet. It was on the internet, I think in the 1990s is what I was told, and until 2015 when it was removed. It was dated, the technology was dated, so I guess renovated or whatever you do, updated, graded, and placed it on the Georgetown Slavery in the Georgetown Slavery Archives. I continued to research the Hicks family. In February 2006, I copied the JPP records and Brother Moberly's diaries. It was a line from the 1900s, as I said, to 2015, when it was moved to Slavery Archives at Georgetown University. Something bothered me about the names of the ships. They were not names, they were numbers. The enslaved people were designated on ships numbered Ship 1, Ship 2, and Ship 3. The butlers were transported to Louisiana on Ship 2. I don't know much about ships, but I thought they had names. I began searching for the name of Ship 2, and that quest ended after 4 long years of research. On July 4th, 2008, I visited U.S. GenWeb, clicked on Louisiana, and found the Inward Slave Manifest for the port of New Orleans. There were several rows of transcription, and I selected row 12, 1837 to 1838. In the search bar, I wrote Nace, my third great-grandparent's name, clicked on it, and the entire family appeared. The details are Port Alexandria, ship Catherine Jackson of Georgetown. I think OS is Overseer Robert N. Winsome, and the date was 13 November 1838. Nace and B.B. Butler and their 10 children were listed by sex, age, height, and skin color. Nace was a designated color was black, and all the other people in the family, BB and her children, were brown. Nace and BB lived a long time. They were found in the 1870 census at ages 80 and 75 respectively. They died between 1870 and 1878. 1878, I think that was a state census, and they were not there. They were present in 1870, but in 1878, they were not. So we believe that they died sometime in between 1870 and 1878. In October 2008, I found and copied the pages on the website of the St. Ignatius Church in St. Mary's County, Maryland. Scrolling through the transcribed record burial, I found 4 butlers: Gladys Butler, Ignatius Butler, Johnson Butler, Lucinda Butler. Ignatius Butler is the son of Nace and B.B. Butler. He did not get on the ship. He ran away. The search for the Butler family continued on and off for the next 12 years. In 2011, I created a blog, African Roots, and added all the articles I had written about the Butler family. Okay. I was in New Orleans celebrating my aunt's Marian's 90th birthday. That's Lee's mother, who will be 100 in November, on 14th of November, 2025. I was in New Orleans celebrating her 90th birthday when Richard Salini, an alumnus of Georgetown University, contacted me. He was searching for the descendants of Jesuit enslaved people when he found my blog, African Roots, an article about my third great-grandparents, Nace and B.B. Butler, who were enslaved on the St. Indigo's plantation. 2 of Richard's goals appealed to me: identify the people sold in 1838 and locate their descendants. He told me he was forming the Georgetown Memory Project, and I joined. I was the first descendant of Jesuit enslaved ancestors to be discovered. When I returned to Spokane, this is after my aunt's 90th birthday, I went to the main library where I volunteered in the genealogy section with 6 members of Eastern Washington Genealogical Society. I told them about my conversation with Richard Salini and asked if they would help me research my family. Everyone agreed to help. One woman One volunteer, I should say, said, "I'll pay you to do this research." One woman heard us discussing the project and volunteered to help us research. So, in all, including me, I had 8 researchers. I provided background materials and taught them how to do African American research. I say their names because they're not mentioned anywhere. My assistants were Carol Anderson, Pat Ayers, Janet Bursch, Barbara Brasington, Mary Holcomb, Juanita McBride, Dolly Webb, and of course me. In that group, I had a librarian historian and another person who was a professional genealogist. 7 books have been written about the Jesuit enslaved people. One book in particular credits Salon for this discovery, and my team and I are not identified and given no credit. One cannot have Richard without me, nor me without Richard. The project was not as challenging as most slave research projects are. The enslaved people's surnames are on the manifest of Catherine Jackson, Georgetown. That is highly unusual to have the names of enslaved people. However, there are not surnames in the JPP records, except for a few, like my Butler family, when they're talking about 64 Negroes who were sold to Jesse Beatty. Her last name, Butler, is there. I was the first descendant to be visited by President John DeGioia. The Butler team met with President DeGioia at the Spokane Public Library on June 13, 2016. We had a group discussion, and then he and I met alone. I showed him pictures of my family and tried to humanize them. They are real people, I told them. I was in Washington, D.C., attending the International Black Genealogical Summit from September 1 through 3, September 1st through 3rd, 2016, when I toured the Georgetown University campus on August 31st for the first time, along with my cousin, Michelle Ledoux. After touring, we ate with professors and their faculty members. The next day, and I want to say that Adam Rothman was among that group of professors who ate lunch. The next day, I was at Georgetown University for assembly, where President DeGioia announced efforts to acknowledge and make amends for university history and the slave trade. A report on the sale of slaves was unveiled, and I was able to take copies for the Butler team and my sisters and my daughter. October 2016 was a busy month. The Descendants of Nays and Boone Butler Sacred Site pilgrimage in Washington, D.C. was held from October 6th through the 9th, 2016. We visited the National Museum of African American History and Culture. It was open. The Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial, the White House. Unfortunately, we did not see Obama. A tour and reception at Georgetown University, Stotterly Plantation in Hollywood, Maryland, and finally, St. Inigo, Maryland, the site of our ancestors' enslavement. In December 2016, I gave my daughter an ancestry DNA kit. For Christmas, the results were shocking. Judy Riffle saw her results before I did. I was in Cuba at the time, and cell phone service was the worst I've ever experienced. After arriving home, I checked my emails and I saw one from Ms. Riffle. She said that a person I administered a DNA test matched Frank Campbell, a Jesuit enslaved ancestor. what are the odds that my adopted daughter also descends from a GU2 72, a GU2 72 ancestor? In December 2021, I received a message from a woman who matched my daughter, and she said that she was Dana's aunt. I checked, and sure enough, she was Dana's aunt. That match led to Dana's biological parents, a grandparent, her aunts, her uncle, and two half-brothers, one paternal and one maternal. Dana is biracial, and the results revealed that her grandfather, an African-American man, is a GU272 descendant. Another shocking development is he also adopted. It makes my brain hurt. It's just thinking about it. I have not done further work with this. Dana's biological father is deceased, and she's in touch with her biological mother, her aunt, who matched DNA, her aunt's children, who have accepted her, and uncle and nieces and all that. She's been accepted in the family, and she's in contact with them. But however, she reminds me frequently, they are not my people. You are. You and Papa are my people. It is astonishing to reflect that my family has dedicated this past 20 years to uncover the truth about the Jesuit enslavement of our ancestors. We are committed to this vital work and will continue asserting their legacy. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'm sure we have some time. No questions.
All right. Well, thank you ever so much, Patricia, for your wonderful message today, for inspiring us all to continue the work of excavating the archives and identifying our ancestors and amplifying their voices. So our next session today will give us some insight into the book known as Let Us Go Free, Slavery and Jesuit Universities in America by Dr. C. Walker Gollar. I will now yield the floor to Dr. Gollar so that he can provide us with his presentation. So thank you ever so much, Dr. Gollar.
Thank you, Shannon, and thank you, Patricia. I mean, I just love, Patricia, I loved hearing your story there. The kind of stuff you do just gets me so excited. And you've done a tremendous amount of stuff, not just for, the people on the Zoom or the broader Descendants community, but I think for American people. I mean, you have opened up the doors, opened up our eyes to see things. Patricia, I loved hearing what you just said. Thank you so much. I could sit and listen to you all day long. I love that journey that you were on is just incredibly fascinating, and it's telling the truth. And that's what I would like to say I try to do. You do it. I thank you so much for doing that.
Well, thank you for your kind words, Dr. Gollar.
Oh,
I really appreciate it.
I could just go on and on and on and never give you my talk and just say thank you, thank you, thank you for all that you've done. I mean, what you've done is unbelievable. I mean, we write these books and stuff like that, but you open the door for that kind of work. So thank you. You're an amazing human being, and I want to meet you. I don't think we've ever met personally. I've seen all your videos and all that kind of stuff.
No, I've not yet. I haven't met you personally.
Yeah, but it's good to see you now and to be with
Yeah.
you.
I didn't know who you were before you were on the program.
Right.
So I looked you up, and I saw that you worked at Jesuit University, and Ohio, right?
Right, but I've taught down at the Xavier University in New Orleans too. But yeah, I've been at Xavier University for 32 years now. So
Oh,
the one
wow.
in
Yeah.
Cincinnati. So I'm in. That's where I am right now. I'm sitting in my office at Xavier University in Cincinnati. I'm a professor of history here. I've been here a long time, and yeah. But I do. A friend of mine, Cecilia Moore, she works down at the Xavier in New Orleans. And I mean, I've known many people going back to Theo Bowman, to tell you the truth, and they got me to go down there to that Xavier. I like both Xaviers, but they're different. The one down in New Orleans is neat. I love being down there. It's hot down there in the summer though,
It
but
is, it's too hot. Have you been to the St. Catherine Drexel Chapel?
oh yes, isn't that beautiful?
Yes, it is. Well,
I
my
mean,
family bought a pew.
did they? Wow,
Yeah, we bought a pew. And I think it's in my mother's name, Augusta Hicks
wow.
Beyond.
You all on the Zoom, you got to go down there. I mean, Hurricane Katrina did terrible damage to that school, but the way they've rebuilt it, including that chapel, is just beautiful, and
Oh, the chapel is beautiful.
it's stunning. So
Yes.
I probably better.
I have a relative on here. My first cousin, Lee Baker, is here, and
Okay.
he lives in New Orleans. So.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
I live in Spokane.
Okay.
Yeah, very
Yes.
cold, and it's been raining, and it melted the snow. So I'm kind of happy for that.
I'm in Cincinnati right now, and it's warm today. I think it's going to get up to 50 or something, but we've had snow and everything. But I probably better get to this presentation to tell
Okay,
you all, so
you
we can
should. I think you
move
should.
along here a little bit. But thank you all, everyone on this Zoom, and
Okay.
Shannon, thank you for inviting me to talk a little bit about my book. I'm happy to do that. What I'd like to do, and probably half hour or so, is to tell you a little bit about why I wrote this book and give you a taste of what the book is all about, and then maybe we can talk about it. And I have some pictures I want to share with you. I'm going to try and share my screen. Let's see if I can do this. I
I'd like to do
get this
that.
going, but I got some, yeah, I got just some images. So let's see if I can get this right here. Wait a minute. Trying to get this. Can you all see that coming up now? Yeah, I got to get this to work here. Let's see.
Yeah, we can see it. I can see it.
Okay. I'll try to, let's see, how do I want to display these pictures now. Give me a second. Sorry about this. Got to navigate there. Okay, that might do it. Okay. Wait a minute. Here we go. Okay, you all can see that okay? The picture of my book and everything. Is that looking all right, Shannon, and everything? Okay.
Looks good.
It's fine. Thank you.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, again, thank you for, inviting me to share a little bit. I'd like to talk a little bit about my book, and I really would like to tell you why I wrote this book first. And if I were to put that in one kind of line, I would say I wrote this book because my mother taught me you have to keep the ancestors alive. You have to keep their memories alive. You have to do that. You see, I come from this old family down in Kentucky, and I live in Kentucky now, where we were very conscious of our ancestors. From the time I was a little boy, we talked about the ancestors all the time. I remember when my grandmother died, I was just 6 years old, and she was the only grandparent I knew. All the other ones died before I was ever born. But my grandmother, when she died, my mom would climb into the bed. I was only 6 years old. My mom climbed into the bed that my brother and I shared, and she'd get right between the two of us, and she would say, "Now, boys, let's say our prayers." And we would start off saying the prayer that, I mean, you all probably know, and it's a prayer that people of faith and Catholics and white and black, free and enslaved, they've been saying the same prayer. I've seen this prayer go back hundreds of years, and we would say the same prayer, and you all know it is, now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. And then mom would say, God bless. And that was my little brother Charles's cue to then list off the living ancestors, the living people of our family, anyone he could remember. And usually he'd just get the immediate family. So he would say, God bless mom and dad and Churchy and Eddie and Spalding and Walker. That's me. And then my little brother would say, and God bless me. because he wanted prayers for him. And then my mom would take over, and my mom would say, God bless. And then she would name off anybody in the neighborhood where I grew up, anybody who was hurting or having problems or struggling or whatever. So she might say, God bless, Mrs. Menke and Dr. Pilite and Mr. Lee. I didn't know at the time, but later I found out that Mrs. Menke, has always struggled with mental health issues. And Dr. Pilite had cancer, and Mr. Lee, well, his wife left him. So, these people all needed prayers, and my mom would pray for them. And then mom would say, God bless. And that would be my cue. I had to speak up then. And I had to name all the ancestors that I could think of. And after my grandmother died when I was 6 years old, I would start off saying, God bless Blotty. That was my grandmother. And it was weird. I mean, she died when I was 6 years old. So honestly, I do not have all that many memories of her. But after I would say, God bless Blotty, mom would often tell stories of her. And she would tell stories of her throughout the whole day because my mom really missed her a lot. And I almost got to know my grandmother better after she died than while she was alive, or while I knew her. And it was amazing. We told those kinds of stories. Like mom would say, when my mom was born, and that picture you're looking at, that's a picture of my mom. That's Blotty, the older woman there. And then that's my mom, the baby. And so my mom would say, when I was born and when I was baptized, my dad was in the hospital. He had a heart attack. And just about the time I was born. And so my mom had to take me to church, St. Augustine's Church in Lebanon, Kentucky, to get me baptized all by herself while her husband was in the hospital. He survived that heart attack, and they had another child, my Uncle Joe, but then he had another heart attack and he died when my mom was a little girl. So my mom really never even knew her dad. And so my mom would talk about Blotty, the woman in the picture there, and she would say how strong she was, how she raised her 5 children all by herself without much money and without much help or anything like that. But mom would say that she had the ancestors with her. You see that gown that my mom's wearing there, that baptismal gown? That baptismal gown was made for this man right here, John Lancaster Spaulding. He's pretty famous, but he was my grandmother's uncle, and he was a Catholic bishop. He was the first bishop of Peoria, Illinois. And so my grandmother knew him, and she called him Uncle Bishop. He was her uncle, and he was a bishop. And my mom would say Blotty survived because Uncle Bishop told her she could survive, that her faith would get her through whatever struggle she might have to endure. Well, that baptismal gown you're seeing, that was made for him in 1840 when he was baptized. And my mother's wearing it in 1923 when she was baptized. All those children wore it, and I wore it when I was a child, born in 1961. And my children, I have 2 kids right now, they're 15 and 17 years old, Benjamin and Caroline, they wore that same dress. So literally, from the moment I was baptized into the Catholic Church, I was clothed in the ancestors, And these are the kind of stories I grew up hearing all the time, and I loved hearing these stories. Anytime Christmas or Easter or Thanksgiving, when the broader family would get together, the old folks would always tell these stories, and I loved hearing these stories. I loved when my uncles would tell me to get in their car and we'd go for a drive. We'd drive through central Kentucky. That's where I was born and raised, and that's where my people have been. This is down, if you go down to Louisville and then you go like south into the middle of nowhere, that's where I'm from. Near Lebanon, Kentucky. That's where I was born. And my uncles would drive me around the countryside and they say, that's where we used to own that farm over there, or that's where your great whatever, that's where he worked, or this is the school they went to. And then, of course, we would go to the churches and they'd park their car in the parking lot and we'd go in and then we would light a candle inside the church. And my uncles would say, you're lighting a candle to keep the memory of the ancestors alive. And of course, then we would go out into the cemeteries too, and we would identify, the tombstones of all my relatives that we could find. And I do the same thing with my kids right now. I take them on these trips down through central Kentucky, and I show them where the ancestors are, and I tell them the stories. I got a sister-in-law. She doesn't like that too much. She says, Walker, you spend too much time with dead people. And, I tried to explain to her that, okay, you can put it that way if you want, but like for me, I spend time with dead people, not so much because I'm interested in the past or something like that, but because I believe they're spending time with me already. They're here right now. You know, I believe that the choices that my ancestors and your ancestors made, those choices, the faith they had, the struggles they endured, the places they were forced to go to, all that stuff influences where I sit right now, you know. And so it's not just that I'm walking with dead people or something like that, but it's almost like my ancestors are walking in and with me, in me. They're with me and in me. And so my mother taught me you are never alone. You're never alone. I mean, I might be sitting like I am right now, you know, kind of in my office all by myself, or sitting at home and the kids are out of the house or something like that. But mom would always say, Blottie's with you, Uncle Bishop's with you, I'm with you. You know, Dad's with you. You know, my mother-in-law just died over Christmas, and I called her Marilyn. But you know, my kids who do the same prayers I do every night, now when they say, you know, after we do the, you know, now I lay me down to sleep, after that, they say, God bless Grandma Oler. The other night, my daughter Caroline, she says, God bless Grandma Oler. And then she says, I hope you like heaven. And you know, it was a sad thing because really my daughter just misses, you know, my grandma, but or her grandma, it's my mother-in-law, and I miss her too. But we tell these stories to kind of remember that they're still with us and they're still guiding us and praying us, and they helped us get here and they help us move forward. And that makes me feel stronger, you know, knowing my ancestors. And I appreciate how my ancestors would talk about this stuff. Sometimes, though, it was hard. You're looking at my Aunt Katie. She lived, so that's my grandmother's sister. She lived a little bit longer than her, so I have more memories of her, and they're not always good. Aunt Katie used to brag about our ancestors, and you know, she never married. She didn't know how to deal with kids and stuff like that. But she'd sit me down. She called me Little Walk. So she would say, Little Walk, you know, you got to know that you come from important people, she would say. Your people found in Maryland, she would say. That's not really true, but that's kind of true. Your people built Kentucky. I mean, that's not sort of. I mean, we've been in Maryland and we've been in Kentucky for a long, long time, but I don't know if we founded it and all. She exaggerated. Or then she would talk about her Uncle Bishop. But she'd talk about her differently than the way my grandmother would refer to her. I mean, Uncle Bishop, that's the same guy right there. That's that John Lancaster Spawning guy. For Aunt Katie, Uncle Bishop was this like God who walked on water and was just like unbelievably perfect. And she tried to get him canonized a saint. And I mean, there's no question this guy was important. You all might know the Baltimore Catechism. I mean, he basically wrote it, you know, and he founded Catholic University in Washington, D.C. So I mean, there's no question this guy's pretty important. But I think Aunt Katie made him out to be something bigger than what he really was. So by the time I'm in my 20s, I started to dig into him and figure out who was Uncle Bishop, who was the real John Lancaster Spalding. And I had a lot to go with because, you know, I grew up with his stuff. I mean, we never had much money in my family, but we kept stuff. So that lamp you're looking at there, there's two of them actually. I remember my grandmother had them. And as a little boy, you know, we weren't supposed to touch those prisms down there because that would break something like. I remember she talking about that. But we called them Uncle Bishop's lamps. They were his lamps. And then when she died, my mother got them. And then when my mom passed away, I got them, you know, and I got them in my house right now. If you come visit me anytime in my Kentucky home, I live in Kentucky now, you can sit in that chair right there. We call that Uncle Bishop's chair, you know. That was his chair. It was passed on to him. And I mean, it was given to him, and that's where he sat in. And it looks like a bishop's chair, doesn't it? And then it's right in front of my house right now. So you can sit in it. We sit in it. And you know, he wrote a lot of stuff. He wrote many, many books. And so I have all of his books. And so when I was in my 20s and I started my PhD studies at the University of Toronto up in Canada, I started reading all these books. And I got a picture of him that was different than what Aunt Katie used to say. Y'all think he looks like me at all? That's him right there. You know, I don't know. People sometimes they say hey, we have the same nose and stuff like that. But I started to get a clear picture. And to tell you the truth, I liked the real guy better than this holier than thou guy. You know, I mean, he had his faults and failures and stuff like that. But I began to appreciate him and I could relate to him and I liked what I was discovering. But I got to tell you all, I discovered some stuff that I had never heard before. This is a biography that was written about him in 1965, and it's a good work. And it, you know, typical biography. It starts about talking about how he was born in Lebanon, Kentucky. That's the same place I was born, and how he grew up on these farms, and then you know the Civil War came. He talks about that and how it ripped apart Kentucky and all that kind of stuff. And then you know after the Civil War, he's a Catholic priest by this point in time, and after the Civil War, he's talking. You see on page 77, he says something I never heard before. So this is page 77. So 77 pages into this biography, where he's already talked about him growing up and all this stuff. He says, I don't know if you can see it right there, but he's a priest. And he says, Father Lancaster Spalding, and here it says, he had grown up, here, can you read that? In the midst of Negro slaves. Now, I want to tell you all something. I've heard many, 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 many stories about my family ever since I was a kid, but nobody ever said we had any connection to slavery. And I thought, what the heck is what? Nobody ever told me about that before. And then isn't it weird? I mean, first of all, he doesn't talk about it till page 77. And then when he does talk about it, this biographer, he says, in the midst of Negro slaves. I mean, that sounds weird to me. Doesn't it sound weird to y'all? Like, it's like you don't want to admit to it, and when you say in the midst of them, it's like, we're sitting side by side. And I think that's not what I learned about slavery. The white people were in charge here. It's not in the midst of, they use words like ownership and all that kind of stuff. And so I thought, what's the truth about this stuff? Obviously, my people don't want to talk about this too much, but I right away got in my car and I drove down to Lebanon, Kentucky. And by this time, this is like in, the mid 1980s or so. I went down and I went to what we call the last leaf on the tree. My mom had died by then, and the only person of her generation alive, the last leaf on the tree, was my Uncle Joe. And I said, Uncle Joe, what's the deal? I went to his house and I said, what's the deal? Did our ancestors, did we own slaves? And he left. He walked into the kitchen. And I went after him and I said, Uncle Joe, he's my godfather, so like I feel close to the guy. He's dead now, but I said, Uncle Joe, answer my question. And he walked into the living room. He didn't want to talk. And then I follow him into the living room and he says, well, Walker, come with me. And we went up into the loft of his house. He lived in a simple little house, but it had a loft, kind of a second floor bedroom. And we went up there and he sat me down in a chair. And I remember he like curled his finger. I'm not sure what that was about, but he curled his finger and he kind of hovered over me and he says, real quietly, he says, Walker, I want to tell you the truth. The truth is, our people did own slaves, he says. But then he gets real loud and he says, but I want to tell you, down in old Kentucky, slavery wasn't all that bad. That's what he's telling me. And then he says, to prove that slavery is not all that bad, I want to tell you a story. I said, okay, I'm still sitting down. And he tells me this story. He says, when Mrs. Spalding, you see her there, Mrs. Spalding? When she called her slaves, Robert and James and Lucinda, and other slaves too, out into the front yard of Evergreen Bend, that house still stands. I got furniture from it. And when she called her slaves out into the front yard of Evergreen Bend and told them, President Lincoln has set you free. To which I didn't do it, but I wanted to pause my Uncle Joe and I wanted to say, Uncle Joe, in Kentucky, the truth of the matter is, I guess you're talking about that Emancipation Proclamation, and that's no question an important document, an amazing document. But, legally, it did not set any enslaved people in Kentucky free. So, it set the people in the rebellious states free, sort of, but Kentucky wasn't a rebellious state. So I'm thinking, are you just making up this story? Like to somehow whitewash history here? But I didn't interrupt him because he's my godfather. I don't do that kind of stuff to my elders, but I just let him go on. So he said, when Mrs. Lincoln called her slaves out in the front yard of Evergreen Bend and said, President Lincoln has set you free, they said, but Mrs. Spalding, where are we to go? Now that's the end of his story. And that's my Uncle Joe's proof that slavery wasn't all that bad in old Kentucky. And I'm thinking, like, I revere my Uncle Joe, and he's up in heaven now, but like I do not agree with that interpretation. I mean, I could think of a million other reasons why those people knew nowhere else to go. I mean, maybe you see that white fence there. Maybe they'd never been out on the other side of that fence. Maybe they literally did not know what's outside this property. I mean, this farm was about 1,000 acres, big, and people were born and raised there and spent their whole lives there. Maybe they knew of nothing else, or if they certainly must have known, you get outside that fence and people aren't going to be all of a sudden nice to you, or freedom doesn't necessarily mean equality and all that kind of stuff. So, I appreciate my Uncle Joe, and I've heard many, many stories from white and black folks down in Kentucky about slavery. And sometimes I, honor what they say, and sometimes I think they're whitewashing history a little bit. So from that point on, I'm working on my Ph.D. in history. This is like 30 years ago. I said, I got to know the truth. And so, Patricia, I started doing all the stuff that you did, looking at census records and wills and, church records, baptismal records, all that kind of stuff that you, Patricia, and everybody else has been doing lately too, which is so neat. And that's where you begin to see the truth of slavery. And that's where you get a little bit of not the whitewash thing, but the reality of slavery. And I discovered, sure enough, that my white ancestors, there's no question about it. They were major slaveholders down in central Kentucky and the ones before them in Maryland too, same kind of thing. And in some of my family papers, I found pictures like this one right here. See this lady right there? This lady was born enslaved to some of my ancestors. And the weird thing is, like, because I've told her story and I've written about Sophie, I have found descendants of her. This is down in central Kentucky. And I've talked with them. And they've never seen this picture before. And they knew nothing about her. I know all about her. So it was a gift I was able to give to Sophie's descendants, by just telling more of her story. I was proud to be able to do that, keeping the ancestors alive. And I found tons and tons of stuff about my family. And you all on this Zoom, I found stuff about your families too, which is interesting. I mean, sometimes we collide here. Like, for example, you see this guy right here? His name was Martin John Spalding. He was another Catholic bishop who's a relative of mine. It's not the same bishop I was talking about before. He's a generation before him. So this guy's the uncle of that uncle bishop I was talking about before. But his name is Martin Spalding. And 30 years ago, I went to Georgetown into that, what's the library called there? What is that library called? Where the Georgetown archives are. I went into there 30 years ago, and I found a letter that was written by him in response to another letter. In 1830, get this now, in March of 1830, a Jesuit at Georgetown wrote him a letter. He's the Bishop of Louisville, Kentucky at the time. Wrote him a letter in 1830, and he said, we're having troubles at this school. This is 1830. We're having troubles at this school. We can't pay the bills, and we don't have any money in the bank. And the only assets we have are, hundreds of people working these farms down in southern Maryland. And he says to them, he says to Bishop Spalding, would you be interested in purchasing them? And Bishop Spalding is a slaveholder himself. He has 7 enslaved people working for him at the Louisville Cathedral. The house is still there where he lived. He built the cathedral. It's still there too. And Bishop Spalding, he writes back. So I found this in the Georgetown archives. So Bishop Spalding, who's my actually, I think it's 3 greats, great uncle, he wrote back to this Jesuit in March of 1830. And he says, I can't purchase these people. But he give a name of another prominent Kentucky Catholic who might be interested in purchasing a large number of enslaved people. I got the letter. The weird thing is I can hardly read the name of this prominent Kentucky Catholic. I'm still working on that. But maybe it doesn't matter, but it could have mattered. I mean, think about that. You all on the Zoom, that could be your story. You got connections to New Orleans and Louisiana because 8 years later, that's where some of your ancestors were sold. You could have gone to Kentucky, had this deal worked out. But this deal did not work out. In Kentucky, they grew tobacco, and, you didn't need as many workers for tobacco. So, the deal eventually panned out in 1838 with, Thomas Malady in charge and all that stuff. And so, but think about that. The course of history could have been quite different. The stuff you find, it's amazing to me. And I found all kinds of other stuff. I mean, what I found, to tell you the truth, is that, what happened in 1838, there's no question that was a heinous sort of act. And in my opinion, one of the worst things I've ever seen in terms of slavery, but especially since it was done by Catholic priests. But that wasn't the first time at all. I mean, Catholics, and I'm Catholic, and I go to church all the time, but Catholics and Jesuits had been selling enslaved people for hundreds of years before 1838. Anytime they had a bill, that was their most prominent commodity, and they would sell people. So 1838, there's nothing new about it. What's new about it is how big it was. Although I want to tell you something, and you read about this in my book, but I want to tell you that, a good 100 years before 1838, the Jesuits down in the Caribbean islands at the island of Martinique, they had another plantation down there. And have you heard this story before? Well, you probably haven't unless you read my book, because other people have written about this a little bit, but I feature it in my book. They didn't know what to do, and this plantation in Martinique was run by corruption and violence and abuse of people. And there were actually about 400 enslaved people working there. the Jesuits said, we got to get rid of this place. And it's a complicated story. You can read all about it in my book, but they sold over 400 people, well, close to 400 people, actually, over 300 people, and separated families and all that stuff. And this is 100 years before 1838. So, what you all know so well, the 1838 sale, it wasn't the first. It was so incredibly well documented. That's what's kind of good about it. And Patricia, again, you know all about this, but it's so well documented. This one, the Martinique one, isn't well documented, but the story's there. But what this says too is that Catholic complicity with slavery and Jesuit complicity with slavery is long. And I don't think it helps to whitewash it one bit. It's the true deal. If we want to be truthful about history, we got to own up to these sorts of facts. And there's more stuff too. Look, isn't this an incredible picture? It's an old tintype, which means it was probably done about the time of the Civil War. And that little girl, it's a girl, the little white child there, that's an ancestor of mine. And the black girl there was probably, when this picture was taken, probably her, slave nanny who, could have nursed her, but probably raised her, took care of her. And as I've dug deeper and deeper into my family roots, what I found is that I might be related to both those people. Because, as I dug deeper and people started telling more stories, I found that, that Mrs. Spalding that I showed you a picture of before, her husband, on both the white and the black side of my family, they say he probably fathered children through his white wife, and that I'm a descendant of that, and through some of his black slaves. So, and I've heard this story on many levels, and it's not just that one man. So it's weird. That little girl in that picture, she might be a blood relative of mine. But I've told this story, and I've found many people, and if you call me white, I've talked to black folks down in Kentucky, and we've done some of the DNA testing, all that kind of stuff, and we are blood relatives. We have common ancestors. So this is a weird thing. The horrors of slavery and the awfulness of slavery has expanded my family tree and given me some black relatives. And it's funny, I come from this unique Kentucky culture, central Kentucky culture. It's different down there. But it's weird. I share it with my black relatives. The type of sweet tea we drink, or the pimento cheese sandwiches we eat, or the way we do Kentucky Fried Chicken is not different. It's unique. Y'all don't do it down in New Orleans this way. It's a unique culture, and I share that with my black relatives. So the horrors of slavery has kind of, I don't know, I love talking to my black relatives, and I've done a lot of that, and we've told stories, and we've written up other stuff too, so there's a lot to say about slavery, and honestly, this is what I try to tell in this book. All about slavery. Of course, I talk about the 1838 sale, and I talk about the freedom suits that Dr. Thomas is so good at, and, he knows all about. I talk about all this stuff, but I put it in a much broader context. Catholic complicity with slavery goes back to the 15th century, and you'll read about that in this book. And Catholic complicity with slavery, maybe one of the worst moments was 1838, but there were many, many other moments of pain and hurt. And so my goal in telling this story is to just tell the whole truth. That's what I was always taught to do, tell the whole truth, not just one moment of the truth. But I try to do it as much as possible from the perspective of the enslaved people. So have you all seen this note right here? This is an actual letter. In my mind, the most precious document that Patricia or anybody else could find anywhere. Because this is a letter written by a man named Thomas Brown, who he never calls himself a slave. He calls himself a colored man. He's proud of that. And he writes this in 1833. He was, born in Maryland, and he worked near the White Marsh Plantation, but he and his wife, Molly, were among the people who were shipped out to St. Louis in 1823 to start up what became St. Louis University. And he worked most of his life for the Jesuits, and his wife was born and raised at White Marsh, so she spent her whole life. And he writes this letter when they're both about 60 years old, and you read this letter, and he's mad. He's mad. He's furious, because he says they're treating us like animals right now. We're living in the shack and we're going to die. And at one point he says, let us go free. So that's where I get the title of my book, Let Us Go Free. For this book, I can't tell you how many things I read. In terms of archival research and books, I bet you if you were to pile it up, it'd be as tall as a house, 2 or 3 stories tall. I read a lot of stuff, but I found one document one document written by an enslaved person while they were enslaved by Catholics. And you're looking at it. That's one document. You know, that everything comes filtered through white folks, you know. As I say in my book, I think if we had more voices like this of the enslaved people written while they were enslaved, where they're telling the truth, which is what I think you get in this letter right here, our understanding of slavery would be way worse than it is today, you know, because it's all filtered through white folks here. So anyway, as much as possible, that's what I try to do. I try to keep these ancestors alive, and I use the skills that I was taught with this PhD thing that I got, you know, to dig into archives. And you know, I've published a ton of stuff on this stuff. I mean, I'll send you my resume if you want. There's written about this a lot of the stuff on you know, Kentucky roots and Maryland roots, and this is what I do for a living. But I want to tell you, there's one last thing I want to end you with, which there's another reason why I did this book. And it has to do with this right here. You know, about midway through writing this book, I wanted to get more pictures. And, you know, this is published by, you know, Georgetown University Press. So the editor said, can you get more pictures? So that you'll find there's a lot of historical pictures in this book, which are amazing pictures. I mean, pictures tell a story. But he said, you know, you go to all these places, and on that map there, that's where all those dots are, you know, on that yellow highlight thing. That's where all the dots are. Those are some places that I talk about, some of the old plantations and stuff like that, that he just wanted to know, can you get some more pictures, modern day pictures? And I've been to this part of the country millions of times. In Southern Maryland, I've been down there a lot, you know, but I just didn't have pictures of some of these places. So this is over one of my spring breaks about 4 or 5 years ago, or maybe more than that. I took this momentous trip over 3 days. You know, I told my wife, I got to leave the kids, I got to go on this trip and take all these pictures. So I drove to where you see the little dots on this map. That's where I had to stop. And I talked with a lot of people, talked with descendants, and I took a lot of pictures, and I heard a lot of stories about these places, and it was great stuff. And you'll see the product of that in the book. I mean, there's pictures and stories and stuff like that. But if you can see the bottom of this map right here, I had never been to that very last dot down there at the very bottom, you know. I'd never been there. That's a church called St. Michael's. I just had never been there. St. Inigo's that's what, Patricia, you were talking about that before. That's right down there toward the bottom and all that kind of stuff. And you know, I've been there millions of times, but I just never been to St. Michael's, which is close. But I talk about that in the book. So I wanted to get a picture of St. Michael's. So I drove to all these other places, and honestly, I was exhausted. I mean, I'm driving like crazy and taking pictures, and you know, eating McDonald's hamburgers all the time. I mean, it was a great trip, and I learned a lot of stuff. But by the time I'm at the bottom of this map, I'm kind of tired. And so I just wanted to get the pictures and get the heck out of there and avoid Washington, D.C. traffic as much as possible, if you all know what I'm talking about. That's the worst traffic in the world, you know. And so I just wanted to get the picture. But I stopped at, you know, the old St. Peter Claver Church. Well, I've been there many times before, and I've talked with the people there, and maybe some of you all been there too, I would assume. You know, that's the old black church down in Southern Maryland. And I wanted to see what the latest was on the Cardinal Gibbons Institute. I don't know if you all know this. If you don't know about the Cardinal Gibbons Institute, well, I write about it in the book, and you'll hear about it there. And there's a friend of mine. She's a professor at the University of Dayton. Her name's Cecilia Moore. I can send that to you if you want. She knows all about the Cardinal Gibbons Institute. In terms of this racial reconciliation, that was one of the biggest highlights. I think that's a great, incredible place. And some women today are using the old school attached to St. Peter Claver Church to tell the story of the Cardinal Gibbons Institute. And it's a history place. And you all might know better than me. I haven't been there in a couple of years now, but I'm not sure if the museum's open yet or not. But back when I was taking these pictures, I just wanted to go there to, you know, see what the latest was. I mean, I've been there and I prayed with these people many times, but I just wanted to, you know, see what the latest was. So I went there, and then I went to that last place I hadn't been, you know, to the St. Michael's Church. Pretty church, isn't it? I just had never been there before. So I took this picture, and, you know, it's like mid-afternoon by then, and I take a picture of the school, which, you know, doesn't look like much of a school, does it? You know, and the roof was leaking at the time and all that kind of stuff. But I got my pictures, and I'm walking back to my truck because I wanted to drive past this like 2, 3 in the afternoon, something like that. And I wanted to get around the DC traffic and then find a hotel and then drive home the next day. That was my plan. And so as I'm going to my truck, some guy comes out of one of the houses there. And he says, you know, hi, can I help you? And I kind of thought, no, I don't need any help. I got enough. I'm tired. I got to get going here. But I explained, I'm this guy from Kentucky, and I'm writing this book, and I just came to get some pictures. And he introduced himself as, well, my name is Father Peter. And he was a pastor of the church there. he's another pastor is there now, but he said, my name is Father Peter, and I'm all interested in history here. And so he said he's born and raised in that part of the country. And he just wanted to know what I was doing. And then he says to me, you ever heard of a woman named Aunt Pigeon? Aunt Pigeon. And I said, dang, you know about Aunt Pigeon? And he said, well, I don't know too much about her, but he says, she's buried here. And he said, you know, you want to come into the church and I'll show you the burial record. So I thought, you know, I really was getting ready to go, but you got pictures of Aunt Pigeon's burial record. Yeah. So we go in, I figure my day's shot. I'm never going to beat the traffic, but this is worth it. So he took us a while, but you see that right in the middle there, 1937. She died January 22nd, 1937, and 3 days later they buried her. Her name was Mary Ellen Whalen, and she was born at Whitemarsh, you know, the old Jesuit plantation there. And then she married a guy named Jones, but they called her Aunt Pigeon. And really, this Father Peter didn't know too much about her, but he said, you know, down here, we got children in this school who, you know, most of them are immigrants, most of them are dirt poor, and they think nothing good comes out of St. Mary's County and nothing good comes from this school here. But I kind of had a sense that Aunt Pigeon would be somebody whose story is worth telling, but I don't know that much about her. Well, I said, you know, he said, these children need some heroes, need someone to look up to. So I said to him, well, I got something in my book about Aunt Pigeon. I got a picture in my book. Here it is right here. You'll see that's in the book right there. And she was an amazing woman. I mean, she was born at Whitemarsh, but not to she wasn't owned by the Jesuits. She was owned by the Carroll family, and you probably know the Carroll family. And but when she was a young girl, they sent her down to Southern Maryland to take care of some white kids, you know, white children. And she spent the rest of her life there nursing these children and raising these children. Eventually, she married a guy named Jones. And she had some children of her own. She had a lot of children of her own, actually, many of whom didn't live to adulthood, but she had children of her own. And they have children, and they have children. I've talked to some of her living descendants today. Many of them still go to that St. Peter Claver Church. She was an amazing woman, and even though she was pretty much blind a lot of her life, it's certainly toward the end of her life, you see she's got a walking stick there. She would walk to church, and she had first walked to that St. Inigo's, and then she'd walk to St. Michael's, and then she'd walk to St. Peter Claver, and we don't know for sure, but she lived to be probably close to 100 years of age, and she kept walking to church, which kind of like surprised me a little bit because she was not always treated well by Catholics, but her Catholic faith remained strong. And so that priest you see there, his name was Horace McKenna. He used to visit her, and this like in the 1920s and 30s, and he said to her, well, what's your secret? You know, first of all, how'd you live so long? You know, and she says, well, I just love God and dance. They called her Aunt Pigeon because she was a little person, as you can kind of see there, but she used to do this dance, which in her day they called it the pigeon dance. So that's where she gets the Aunt Pigeon. But really, she descended from people of West Africa, from Sierra Leone, the Limba tribe. And to this day, I've been there, you know, they do this dance that they call the pigeon dance. It's weird. I mean, talk about her ancestors. I mean, she danced the way her ancestors from generations ago danced, and it's an amazing thing. And that kept her spirits up. And then Father McKenna said, well, what's your secret to life? You know, I mean, is there anything that kind of gets you through all your struggles? And she said, the darker the night, the brighter you's got to shine, you know. And that's a bit of a paraphrase of St. Ignatius Loyola. But I thought, dang, this woman, she's got something to say, and I'm going back to those children now. I mean, she's got a story to tell that's worth telling, and so I've done some work with these kids, and it's hard though because they don't have decent internet down there, so it's hard to talk with these folks. But and they got a new principal and a new pastor too. So I'm working through some of that stuff there. But I'm going down there to tell them about Aunt Pigeon, and I wrote this book for you all, really, for adults. You can read about Aunt Pigeon, but I'm doing another book. It's probably going to be called Aunt Pigeon, and it's going to be published by Georgetown University Press, but it's really for these children right here. I mean, my mother taught me you got to keep the ancestors alive, and they give you strength and power. And the reason why I wrote this book is because I've been trying to keep my ancestors alive. And, I feel privileged. I don't make all that much money or anything like that. But this college, I'm a college professor, and I've been taught how to do all the stuff, again, that Patricia and so many of the rest of you do, doing research and stuff like that. And I feel like I have a responsibility to use the skills that I have to tell these stories. I don't make any money. I don't make any money from this book at all, but like I feel like I have a gift to give to these children. They never heard of Aunt Pigeon before, but you should see how they light up when I tell her stories. So I hope I haven't taken too long here, but that's what I want to share with you, a little bit of who I am and why I wrote this book. And I'm looking at the time here now. Yeah, we got a little bit of time. I don't know if maybe I'll stop sharing here, and I wonder if anybody's got any questions or comments or anything anybody wants to share or say. I'll be more than glad to tell you what I know. Thank you for listening. And Brenda, you want to say something? I see a hand up there.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing your story and writing the book and continuing, to tell the stories and the history and accepting the fact that and letting other people know that yes, these are also your family. Some of the people that you have mentioned are your family. I appreciate that. My
Well,
ancestors my parents are from Kentucky. So
is that right?
yes, they're from the Madison County area.
Yeah, that's not far from where I'm from.
Yes, I see some relatives and some colleagues online also on this call.
Mhm.
So I'm excited about continuing the history. At first, felt a little downtrodden, but due to things going on in today's America, but
Yeah.
and it almost made me pull away. But things like these types of forums, help me to want to persevere. And I'd like to ask you, with your study of the different people that you have studied in your ancestry and your family, and also outside of that, have you pursued looking into finding the ancestors of people such as Aunt Pigeon? Have you found, not the ancestors, I'm sorry, the descendants of Aunt Pigeon, to collaborate with you on what you're doing to share the stories? And it's like, for me, finding my ancestors in my history, and I'm going to put my video on. I hate to talk to people without putting on my video. So yeah, here I am. Hello, everyone. So yes, I I like to find out the stories beyond that triumph living that those descendants have, or where are they now? That's important to me. Where are they now? Where is Aunt Pigeon now? Her descendants.
Yes, Brenda, thank you so much. And I'm like you. I am inspired by this stuff. I mean, like you refer to the political climate in which we live these days and all that kind of stuff. And, I don't want to get into that all that much, but that just depresses the heck out of me. But part of me, that's where I rely on my ancestors because they've been around for a long time. And I feel like, honestly, I think the storm we're going through right now, I mean, I think they just say weather it, it'll pass. And, the darker the night, the brighter you just got to shine. That's what I kind of say on all that kind of stuff. But so thank you for saying that, and thank you for all your thoughts. And yes, I have. I mean, Aunt Pigeon. I mean, she did have. I've detailed all her whole family tree as much as I can, and I've traced them all the way back to Africa, which is pretty cool. And you can do this kind of stuff. I mean, I don't know if you've ever heard of Nikki Taylor. She's a historian. She's the chair of the history department at Howard University, and I love the way she says this kind of work is scrappy work. You got to do scrappy work, which means you get little pieces here and there, and you put it all together and you get a story. So I've been able to do that with many people, like Aunt Pigeon, trace out her whole ancestry. So I got a family tree of hers. Same thing with, like, some of your all's relatives, Louisa Mason and stuff like that. You can do that kind of work. But and that's like historical work. That's going into archives and doing all that kind of stuff. And I like doing that kind of stuff. But it's a whole different level to talk to descendants. That's what I've found. And talking with you all, and yes, with Aunt Pigeon, a couple of her descendants that I've talked to, they still go to that St. Peter Claver Church, which she laid the cornerstone for that church. So, and they didn't know that. So, I mean, but they've told me some stories that they kind of been passed down on the family tree. And, you know, you got to take all that kind of stuff with a grain of salt almost, because, you know, stories that are passed down, like within my family, you know, sometimes they're not always historically accurate or whatever, but they're the memory that people have, which that's true. That's for sure true. So, yeah, I've definitely, I'm kind of working on that right now. I mean, this book on Aunt Pigeon, it's, I should, it's a lot of it's written, but the part that hasn't been really written yet is the last chapters where I'm talking to the descendants, and I'm still doing that. And this spring, I'm going back to St. Peter Claver Church, where I'm going to talk with some more of the people there and hear what stories they have. And I don't know if any of you all know, but I mean, Aunt Pigeon, I mean, she was not part of the 1838 sale, but she was related to people who were. So she's, you know, if you have connections to the 1838 and 272 people, she's part of your family history too, you know. So I suspect once I get more into that, Brenda, that I will, you know, I will have a lot, you know, a lot more descendants to say. And I'll tell you this, like there's a guy, I don't know if you can see this book right here, but there's a guy, his name is Horace McKenna. He's a pretty famous person, especially in Washington, D.C. He's the guy that was in that picture before that I showed you, you know, with Aunt Pigeon. And he's pretty famous. And there's Horace McKenna Centers in Washington, D.C. But Horace McKenna, he was Mr. Washingtonian in 1977, I think. President Jimmy Carter, you know, heralded him out for the good work that he was doing. And he definitely did some good work. But he said, I was inspired to do this work by Aunt Pigeon, you know? And nobody knows who Aunt Pigeon is. So I think give me a little bit of time. And it might be another year or two before, you know, I get this book out. But Brenda, basically, like what you put on the table of me talking to more of the descendants is that's where I'm at right now. That's what I'm doing.
And
Other descendants, like my Kentucky people, I got that all down because I live in Kentucky. So it's easy for me to talk to those people. So, yeah.
And you know, I believe in collaborating with the descendants when someone finds out the information, because a lot of times you as a scholar, as a historian, you have privy to that information. And that's what people like me are seeking out. We don't know, it's not released to us. It's not readily available. So I encourage you to, with Aunt Pigeon, collaborate with the descendants that you find. You know, not just to, you know, let them tell their story.
Right.
Is what that's just that's something that I'm very adamant about, is letting the descendants tell their story. And thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing.
Oh, thank you, Brenda. I take your advice. Great. Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah. Yeah. Gosh, Juju, do you have something you want to say? I see.
Yes, I am the grandmother of Juju.
Okay.
This is Rochelle Sanders Prater. I actually got to meet you, Dr. Gollar, at the 2019 University Studying Slavery, where UC and Xavier co-hosted.
Right.
Again, I want to say thank you for gracing us with your presence. I also wanted to let you know that it's great to hear that you have made connections with some of the enslaved people, because one of the things that our organization is doing, we are in a season of redesign. So we have a new name and a new logo. Hopefully we can share this with everybody before the month's end. But you mentioned the Kentucky. I didn't hear you refer to it as the Holy Land.
You're right.
Number one. The other thing I wanted to tell you, you were saying about the potential of connections. Yeah, there are connections. There are people, I myself actually matched somebody who have a DNA match to somebody that was a former staff member at Georgetown. We don't know how, but her father, last name Johnson, was in Louisville, Kentucky. And so I was surprised to find out the connection of Kentucky, which I actually heard about that when I met you, when I did the breakout, my sister and I.
Right.
I just was curious about if you had any information to share about Daniel Arthur Rudd and the significance of, I too am, by the way, I'm in Cincinnati as you are.
Right.
But I wanted you to share a little bit about the significance of what he's known for. You know, he was billed at, I believe your colleague at University of Dayton, Agee, am I saying his name right?
AG is how you say it.
AG. He's known for calling the church to justice. I was surprised to learn that Archbishop Elder was his champion.
Yeah.
You know the tone of Cincinnati, and you
Right.
know when you say elder, that surprised me quite frankly. The other thing I wanted to tell you regarding Louisville and the history and the movement, my sister and I had the pleasure of attending Buttermilk Days down in Bardstown. We actually went to Bardstown twice. I connected with Carrie Slivers. I'll put in the chat, you guys, there's this wonderful documentary that the late, great Mr. Crump did that talked about Smoke Spalding and the slaveholding of the Catholic Church. Is called Facing an Uncomfortable Truth, I believe is the name of it.
Right.
But I wanted to tell you there's a connection. The current Archbishop, Shelton Fogg, is actually from a little town outside of where we grew up in Louisiana. My sister and I had the pleasure of attending his installation in, what was that, 2021, I guess? It was right after COVID. But I met a lot of people who are very faithful Catholics and so forth and so on. And the struggle that we're having as an organization and trying to connect with these descendants is, while people are saying they're descendants, and I'm on the team that Patricia heads up called a certification team through our organization. The stories are there, but we need documentation. So like, you know, like you say, that story of Tom Brown and his wife over in St. Louis, we're needing documentation. And are you familiar with the Cross, the Catholic religion organization studying slavery?
Oh, I totally am. I don't want to interrupt, but I'm going to host their conference here at Xavier. So Juju, you're welcome to come. Put it on your calendar.
I definitely will.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely will. That's great to hear. So, but I just wanted to say that it's important, just like when it comes to the concept of reparation right now, everything is being silenced. But I think that effort in a documentary that PBS did, The Cost of Inheritance, when people of the Caucasian race understand and they repenting about what happened and they take a position of wanting to share what they got in their basements or in their closets or in their family history, that's the true healing process. And when we say, you know, for me personally, the knowledge and the truth, I won't be around very long for my granddaughter. Juju is my granddaughter. My name is Rochelle. But I won't be alone very long. But it's important. I heard you in your introduction of you saying when what your grandpa told you or whatever. It's important for her to have this story. And see, I'm one of them people, I'm real big upon being able to leave for my grandchild the things that money can't buy. And the things to give her life and to give her encouragement and give her, like what Aunt Pigeon said, the thing about, in the darker of the night, the brighter, you gotta shine. It's the knowledge that will let her shine.
Right.
So again, I thank you, and I'll be emailing, and maybe we can have lunch sometime soon. I'm close to Xavier. I live in the Winwood School up by Winton Woods, so we can connect.
Rochelle, it's so good to talk with you. And I remember you at that other conference, and we will have you here again.
Okay.
You said so many good things. I have nothing to. I mean, I can comment or whatever, but nothing to say.
No, you don't have to comment. I just wanted the family to know, because I have reconnected with family, documented, and DNA that they took us from Maryland. We were taken to Louisiana. And it was my great grandfather, that close, who was a Hawkins. And I want to know, we'll talk offline about any knowledge you have about Hawkins, because I suspect that his mother, Letty Hawkins, in the census, when we looked at her, she shows there is a lady her age that show up in Louisville, Kentucky. And I had actually deleted that. I was like, we're not in Kentucky. That's wrong. And then I heard about this, and supposedly her father, Blacklock, what was his name? Richard Blacklock is supposedly be buried somewhere in Kentucky. I want to be able to explore that, but I need some assistance in knowing how to navigate. My sister and I went to the archive in Kentucky, and they didn't have death records. They just had an entry of who the person was and what they died from in the funeral home. And supposedly she's buried in Eastern Cemetery. I don't know if that's still a functioning cemetery or not in Louisville, Kentucky. So we'll talk.
We will talk, Rochelle, and I want to tell you, Rochelle, and really everybody else that, like this is kind of what I do for a living. I mean, I'm a professor at Xavier University, so that means I teach 3 classes a semester, and I got all kinds of other, committee work and all that kind of stuff. Plus, I'm a dad, and I got 2 teenage kids, so I'm a busy man. But this is what I do for a living, and I feel privileged. I mean, this is my 32nd year at Xavier, so I've been doing this for a while, and I've had some familiarity with digging through archives and looking and how to interpret stuff and how to make sense of things and how to find things. And I'd be glad to help any of you all do any of this stuff because I think it can be done. It sometimes takes patience to do this. And that's where, like, Rochelle, you referred to Gary Agee. I should show you all. I got his book over here somewhere. Yeah. This is Gary was a former student of mine. There's Daniel Rudd right there that you talked about him. This is, you can look this up easy. Gary Agee, he's a great professor up in Dayton. He's a minister too. He's got a lot going on, but he resurrected the story of Daniel Rudd. And like you said, Rochelle, Daniel Rudd was an amazing person who really argued that all people, especially Catholics, need to listen to Black Catholics. Like Black Catholics have something to offer, something unique to offer. I mean, I think about that with Aunt Pigeon, the way, the fact that this woman who was treated so poorly by Catholics, the fact that she still remained Catholic makes me think she must have really got what it means to be Catholic, And so I think we can learn a lot from talking to her or talking to Daniel Rudd. So you all might want to look up this book, or, he's from the Holy Land. That's what you talked about. That, I mean, maybe you all know this, but, in terms of the Catholic experience in the United States, it all started in Maryland, down at that St. Inigo's. I mean, that's where it all started. But the second major hub of Catholicism is Central Kentucky. That's where I'm from, and that's where so many people, so many Catholics are from, and it's all still down there. It's down near Louisville, and that's where all those houses I was showing you some pictures of. I mean, they still exist down in Kentucky, and it was a major hub of Catholicism. And I think those people down there have a lot to say about, what does it mean to be a people of faith, or how do we navigate through this Catholic stuff? So, Rochelle, thank you so much. I mean, there, even all the buttermilk days, or where I don't know if you've ever been to the ham days. That's what they do down in Lebanon. That's where I'm from. People celebrate their culture down there, and they're proud of it. And when you go to those kind of festivals and you talk to people, you hear stories. I mean, there's a lot of stories down there, and the fact that it's kind of in the middle of nowhere means they don't tear old stuff down, and they keep the memories alive. So there's a lot to be learned. Thank you, Rochelle, and I know.
And I want to apologize to everybody. Shannon, I did not see your time thing, and we went over. I apologize. That's an opportunity for improvement when doing this. And I believe Nages had a question, right, Shannon?
She did. We are at the 12:35 mark, so we are scheduled for a break. However, if you want to use your break to continue the conversation until we begin with Dr. Thomas at 12:40, then you are free to do that as well. Thank you ever so much.
So Nages is from Southern Maryland. Is she, Nages, are you on?
Hi, I'm here. Hi, Rochelle. Nice to talk with you.
Hi, sweet. Go ahead. I'm on mute. Go ahead.
Thanks. I'm actually from Washington, D.C. Dr. Gollar, we talked, it's been years now, but we talked quite a while ago. Thank you for your book and for your presentation. I just wanted to clarify a few things, and I appreciate, I've never written a book, so I'm not trying to be critical. I just wanted to point a few things out. So Aunt Pigeon did live to be about 108 years old. Excuse me, I'm in my car. She did live to be about 108 years old. She was sold in 1830 to Notley Young from his father-in-law, Francis Magruder Hall. I have that document. It's dated 1830, and she is referred to as Pigeon in that document. She would have likely been about 4 or 5 years of age. So I know that we have oral histories, and I guess we can refer to that maybe as hagiography is this term versus history. But I just wanted to point out that in that document, she's referred to as a little girl named Pigeon.
Yeah.
Yes, and I'm happy to share that document with you if you don't have it. It's in the land agreements for the state of Maryland. I also just wanted to because I've read your book. I wanted to talk about sort of your process for how you weed between documented evidence and evidence you may receive through oral histories. You have a family tree for the Mahoney family, and it's, again, not being critical, but it's not exactly correct. And you have some conversations about and Joyce being enslaved by the Jesuits. And I just kind of wanted to ask from your process, how you go through the process of saying, well, the family has told me this, but the documents say that, and when to decide what to include.
Oh, thank you. And I readily admit, as you're dealing with this stuff, I think it's true with any history. Every historian is kind of has to take certain leaps and bounds and try to piece together what they have. I think when you're dealing with the history of slavery, you have to do a little bit more of that kind of stuff. Um, I'm not sure how to tell you how I do it. I mean, I try to listen to all sides and try to make some logical guess almost as to what's right. And with the Mahoney family tree, I see every book as like a conversation starter, throwing stuff out. This is my best effort. And I welcome any kind of further thoughts. And I got to definitely, well, I know some of the stuff you're talking about with Aunt Pigeon, but any other insights anybody can have, I want to have that out before I get this next book out. I don't know. It's tricky. I mean, even you can't, of course, you can't always even trust the written documents, I mean, things like census records and stuff like that, they're notoriously wrong, or when people put down birth dates, that 108-year-old date of Aunt Pigeon, that comes from that Horace McKenna trying to figure out how old she was. She said she didn't really know how old she was, but she knew how old she was in relationship to some of the people who she worked for. And so that's how he kind of calculates that out. But other, newspaper articles said she was way older than that. And then some said she was way younger than that. There were a number of things written about her while she was still alive. She was kind of a celebrity, sort of in her own day. And so you got to piece through all that stuff and try and figure out what's really true. And I want to get the facts right, that's for sure. But I readily admit I'm not going to get them all right. Even when you're talking about people like those bishops I was talking about, sometimes those facts are wrong too. But more so, what I want to get right is the spirit of the people. So that's kind of my bottom line. So like when I talk about Aunt Pigeon and how she said things like the darker the night, the brighter you've got to shine. I think that's almost more important than getting the exact date right. In terms of it, I mean, who cares what, I mean, it matters, but whether she was 108 or 110 or whatever, but the fact that she endured what she endured and that she can still remain an inspiration for us today, that's almost, for me, the more important thing. But thank you for and anyone else. I know we don't have a whole lot of time here, but you can always reach me at Xavier. It's easy to find me at Xavier. I teach at Xavier University. You look it up. It's easy to get my email or whatever. I would love any further advice you have or conversations, anything. And I know there's some other hands up here. I should shut up. I don't know. I don't know, Shannon,
Yes,
if we can.
we are now over time.
Okay.
We need you at this time. Thank you ever so much to yield to Dr. Thomas. And again, everyone, if you have additional questions or comments, you can contact Dr. Gollar via email or send direct messages via our messaging system. So now the floor is open to Dr. Thomas. Thank you so much.
Okay, can everybody hear me all right? Shannon, okay, good. Shannon, thank you. And thanks everybody for being here today. Thank you, Patricia, for your presentation, your amazing research, which has inspired me for many years and bringing truth to light. I think that's the work that you've been doing, and it comes from piecing together this archival evidence and this family evidence and this family experience. And it's so meticulous. I think somebody said earlier, it's about piecing together shards of information or shards of the past and trying to see our human experience, our past, our collective past, our history. And so I find it incredibly inspiring what is happening on this call and what is happening around us in our culture today, despite some of the political challenges that have been mentioned here today. This is an inspiring time. This is a time when history from many different perspectives and many different pieces are being brought together. And we collectively, I think on this call, have come to, I'll speak more about this in just a minute, we've come to an incredible moment in American life and culture, which is so many of us are contributing to an act of reconciliation through and in history. And I find that inspiring and beautiful and just transformative for myself personally, for our families, and for our communities, and for Americans. And so, Patricia, thank you. Walker, thank you for your presentation. We have some similar themes that we're going to hit on in what I'm talking about. And so I want to share with you some of the work behind my book, A Question of Freedom, which came out a couple of years ago. Here's the book. I'm sure some of you have seen it, and why I wrote this book, and what I was trying to do with this book, and also share with you some of the resources that have all been put online. All of the freedom suits that I write about, I've tried to make them available to everyone, to the community, to descendants, to scholars, to teachers, and to students. I think we need to, we have an obligation to share this research and bring it out into especially our schools so that students and teachers can see the truth of the past in ways that we are sharing. I want to say, in the spirit of this call, that I started this, when I started this book, it was really an academic inquiry for me. I began it as a scholar of American law and a scholar of American history. And quite simply, I had read a report of a Supreme Court case in 1813 brought by a woman named Mina Queen on behalf of herself and her daughter Louisa, and she had sued a man named John Hepburn for her freedom. So this was Queen v. Hepburn, and the case went to the Supreme Court in 1813, and I didn't know anything about freedom suits other than Dred Scott's. I really had no awareness. I mean, I'm a historian and a scholar, and a scholar of American law, but I just didn't realize that there were freedom suits earlier in American history. And this one came from the DC Circuit Court and then went to the Supreme Court. And the case was decided against Mina Queen and her daughter Louisa, and so they remained enslaved after the Supreme Court decision. And one of the things that caught my attention was that it came from Prince George's County, and that it came before the DC Circuit Court. And I knew that an ancestor of mine, Alan Bowie Duckett, had been a judge on the on the DC Circuit Court bench right around that time period. and I knew that the Duckett family in Prince George's County, Maryland, had been slaveholders. I grew up right there in in Alexandria, Virginia, and spent a lot of time in Maryland, both on Prince George's County and down the western shore to southern Maryland and St. Mary's County. And I knew that, but that's about all I knew. I didn't know anything about the Duckett family. And I also, when I first started this research in 2010, when I saw the case of Queen v. Hepburn, I didn't know that there was any connection to the Jesuit society at all, or to Georgetown, or to the Catholic Church. I did see that one of the other Queen family members had sued the Reverend Francis Neal, who I found out later was president of Georgetown College. But at the time, when I first started working on this, I had no idea that the Jesuits were slaveholders. I had no idea that so many of these early freedom suits, and we'll talk about this in a second, were so important. And so I went to National Archives, and I started in Washington, D.C., and started pulling some of the records of these cases. And I want to show those to you and share those with you in just a second. But before I do that, I mentioned that this began as an academic study of American law and the importance and trying to understand these freedom suits. But like others here today, this turned into a personal journey as well. Early on in the research, I realized, and I'm going to give you two examples of this, but there are many in the book that I share. But early on in the research for this book, I was trying to find out what happened to Louisa and Mina Queen after the Supreme Court decision against their freedom in 1813. And as I started searching census records and whatever I could find, I turned to one of the most important sources in Maryland, which was an 1864 census of enslaved people held by Maryland slaveholders, because the Maryland slaveholders, in the very last months of the Civil War, wanted the state to compensate them for the possible emancipation of enslaved people in Maryland. And so they tabulated all of the people they held in bondage and submitted those to the Maryland state government. Well, that census showed me, to my surprise and horror, that the last members of the Queen family enslaved in Maryland, recorded in the 1864 census by slaveholders, were held by my ancestors, the Ducketts. And so the connection to the case and the connection to this history suddenly became personal in a way that I could not, ignore. I couldn't say, well, slavery or this history is in the past. No, it was very much present in my life, in the world today, in ways that, as I continued to do this work, came up again and again and again. And I think we've heard that theme from the other folks on the call. The second example of this connects directly to the Jesuits and the Catholic Church. Later on, working in the archives of Georgetown and of the Diocese of Baltimore, and I would say that there are many moments of, transformation as a writer and an author when you're confronting this history in such powerful ways, and this is one of them for me. And I didn't really write about it in the book, but I want to share it with you, especially given this call's purpose. John Carroll was the Archbishop of the diocese in Baltimore. And at one point in this series of freedom suits that had been filed by enslaved families that the Jesuits enslaved, and we'll get to that in just a second, but dozens of freedom suits filed against the Jesuit priests in Maryland. At one point, the lawyers' bills for the Catholic Church, for the Jesuits in Maryland, were piling up. And at the end of a year, I think it was 1805, the Catholic Church in Maryland had spent so much, or had so many bills from the lawyers defending them, defending the Jesuits, the Jesuit priests and the church against the freedom suits by these enslaved families. Bishop Carroll writes the corporation, the Roman Catholic Corporation of Clergymen in Maryland, and essentially authorizes and specifically recommends selling a few enslaved people to pay the lawyers. And, you know, Alan Bowie Duckett, the ancestor of mine I just mentioned, was, I later discovered, a lawyer for the Jesuits, defending the Jesuits against the freedom suits in Prince George's County, Maryland. And so the truth of this, the truth of my family's complicity in slavery and enslavement in American history, my family's immediate connection to the story of the freedom suits, the story of the Jesuits, that they were lawyers for the Jesuits, that their bills were paid by the sale of enslaved people. This history, I think, gradually, it became more and more urgent to me, and this is at the heart of the book, gradually more and more urgent, the need to reconcile the truth of American slavery and history in this history. And that's really at the heart of this book, because I think, you know, we've talked a little bit about this already, but so much of American history of slavery is taught or presented in textbooks or often in schools in very nameless and faceless ways. Like slavery is an institution. Slavery is this abstract experience in American history. It's in that institutionalized way, it's presented, I think, obviously in a way that's nameless and faceless. But enslaved families like yours have genealogies, they have histories, they have lives, they have ideas, they have ambitions, they have experiences that are in every way at the heart of American history. And so the truth of slavery and its place in American history was something that I wanted to put at the heart of this book, to write the American history of this experience with enslaved families fully present in the story, named and actors in this history. And so, so I want to share with you a couple of big points of the book, and then have some conversation about it. And I'm going to leave plenty of time for question and answer, because I think that's one of the most valuable ways for us to share information with each other and talk about these issues. I'm going to put in the chat one link, and then I'll put another link later. And I'm going to share on the screen right now that link. Is that all right, Shannon? I'm going to share that on the screen.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
And so you should see now the website. Oh, say, can you see? Is everybody seeing that? Shannon, are you seeing that on the screen?
I am. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So all of the freedom suits that are part of this history in Maryland and beyond Maryland, in Louisiana and elsewhere, are but centered in Maryland and Washington, D.C. and Virginia, are contained in this collection right here. And we wanted to put every freedom suit we could find. There are more than 600 freedom suits in Maryland and Washington, D.C. against slaveholders, in which enslaved people, enslaved men, women, and children and families sued individual slaveholders for their freedom. And so the earliest ones go back to the 17th century in Maryland, and they continue after the Revolution. There are hundreds of freedom suits in Maryland in the 1790s. That's a particularly important part of this history that the cases against the Jesuits are at the center of. But they continue all the way up until the American Civil War in the 1860s. And so when I went to National Archives in 2010, I was hoping to retrieve the case file for the Queen v. Hepburn Supreme Court case. And I went to the, right there on Pennsylvania Avenue, and I went to the reading room, and I asked to pull the Supreme Court case file, and I filled out the little slip with the exact location for the archivist to pull the file. And they went off and they went back into the archives, and they came back out and said, well, we don't have the case file for Queen v. Hepburn. We don't know where it is. And there are some Supreme Court case files in the early years of American history that we've lost, that we just don't have. And that's probably one of them. And the archivist said, but you know what? You might be interested in this, this index that we've compiled. And he handed me an index of all of the cases involving African Americans in the DC Circuit Court. So the court below the Supreme Court. This is the court where Mima Queen brought her freedom suit first, where Priscilla Queen sued the Reverend Francis Neal, the president of Georgetown College, first. And so, and again, I want to emphasize, I didn't know anything about the Jesuits or the Catholic churches or about Georgetown and its relationship to slavery. I simply said to the archivist, sure, I'd love to see that. I'd love to see that 3-ring binder. He hands it to me. This is really pre-digital. There was no searching online or anything. It was, here's a 3-ring binder, flip it open. And this is what I saw. Now, this is not exactly what I saw, but I'm showing you down here. See the related cases part of the Queen family. We can see how many related cases there were. Well, when I flipped open the 3-ring binder and opened it to June of 1810, which was the term of the court that Mina Queen had filed her freedom suit, I immediately noticed that there were other Queen family freedom suits. And again, not knowing anything about this, I then started flipping the pages of the 3-ring binder, and there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of freedom suits filed by families: the Queen family, the Joyce family, the Mahoney family, the Thomas family, the Butler family, the Shorter family, the Duckett family as well. So I wanted you to see this list, because that is what, at that moment, looking at in the archives and just looking at this index and realizing several things that are at the heart of this book. One is the importance of families in this history, in the history of, in American history, and in the history of American slavery. That families like the Queens, like the Mahoneys, like the other families in the GU 272 and many others, were interconnected, were bringing these freedom suits, and this was so important, across multiple generations. So when I opened the records for this case, you can see, it was filed in 1810. Here is the original petition for freedom. Can everybody see that? To the Circuit Court of DC. And the lawyer for Mina Queen in 1810 was Francis Scott Key, F.S. Key, signed right there. Francis Scott Key, we know, of course, as the author of the Star-Spangled Banner, the poet. He was a lawyer. He was a working lawyer. He represented a lot of families in Washington, D.C., who sued for freedom. But his relationship to this story is complicated, and we can talk about that in the Q&A. So that's the original petition for freedom. But when we open up some of these other documents, and this is where the Catholic Church really, and the Jesuits' role in this became clear to me in a way that I did not know when I set out on this research. The case is filed in 1810. The index that I told you about reveals that there are hundreds of freedom suits in Washington, D.C. I did not know about that. And I started to work on every single one of these freedom suits. Well, with the Queens and the Mahoneys and others, the cases filed in Washington, D.C. in 1810, right here, right, included documents, depositions that were taken in the 1790s in Maryland. They were taken in cases that I did not even know about when I first started working on this. And so I went to the Maryland State Archives to try to track down, well, where did these depositions come from? Why do we have depositions from 1792 in Prince George's County, Maryland, in this DC Circuit Court case in 1810? And when I got to the Maryland State Archives, I began to realize that all of these cases in Washington, D.C., or most of them, were continuations of freedom suits that had been happening in Maryland since the 1780s. And that two of the most important freedom suits, literally in American history, came out of Maryland, and both were filed, the Queen families and the Mahoney families, against the same Jesuit priest, Reverend John Ashton, one of the founders, one of the directors of Georgetown College. And John Ashton was the plantation priest and manager and slaveholder at White Marsh plantation, which Walker referenced a few minutes ago, in Prince George's County, Maryland. And so at that moment, the full complexity of the Catholic Church's involvement in slavery became more apparent to me, and I also really realized that one of the most important things for us to think about and talk about is the longevity of families and the intergenerational freedom suits that were happening in Maryland. So Mina Queen, the case that we're looking at here, was the third generation of freedom suits. And, you know, her grandmother had sued for freedom. So this multi-generational freedom suit story is really at the heart of this book. Let me do one quick thing and then take the share screen off and make a few concluding comments and thoughts. One of the things I mentioned is putting together all of these case files. So many of the depositions in the freedom suits, including depositions by free Black deponents, free Black witnesses who themselves were litigants in freedom suits in the 1790s, telling the story of their family's genealogy. That in other words, one of the things that was happening in the freedom suits is that witnesses, Black witnesses, free Black witnesses, were taking the stand to elaborate on and illuminate their family's genealogy. And so one of the things we've tried to do here is include the documentary record of a network that's being described in the freedom suit documents themselves, in the legal record, as best we can. So this isn't really a family tree, but for each family, we've tried to put together what is being asserted by, in many cases, free Black witnesses, themselves part of the family, about the family's genealogy, to introduce that into the court record and to try to reprise that here in a way that you can navigate and connect with. And so you can go to each one of these documents to follow where that statement is being made. Let me stop sharing and okay. So a couple of further thoughts, and there are two other things I want to mention with us today. One is that one of the most important parts of this book for me is that I wanted to tell this story in such a way that people would realize that the enslaved families who sued for freedom, the enslaved families of Maryland, the enslaved families of elsewhere, Louisiana, they knew the law. They knew the cultural meaning of the law. They knew legal practice. The law was an oral experience in 17th and 18th century America. And so rather than lawyers driving these freedom suits, it was the families who were at the heart of this story and who brought these cases themselves, that they were active legal and political actors in their day and time. And I think that is part of the history of slavery that, at least in popular understanding, is something we need to really help people understand, because that's what I mean about reconciling history. We have a history that's popularized and that's often discussed about the early American Republic that just doesn't include enslaved families, Black families in the story. And if it does, it doesn't recognize their actions, their legal knowledge, their experience, and their active agency in American history. And then second, and I guess I would say also, this really became clear to me in the case of Charles Mahoney, and we can talk more about that in the questions if you'd like. And then last, I hope this book puts in front of the whole field of American history. I hope it finds its way into schools and into teaching for our K-12 students. The idea that these, well, first of all, that slavery was a dubious institution in the law and had been for centuries before the American Revolution. And the moment from day one that the revolution, that the colonial order shifted into an American republic, it was enslaved families, these people who challenged the legality of slavery. And these freedom suits really have that effect. They are the most significant legal challenge to slavery until Dred Scott, the Dred Scott case. So the Queen family, the families of Maryland, the Catholic families of Maryland who are enslaved by the Jesuits in the Catholic Church are part of, in the two most significant, the Queen family and the Mahoney family, Joyce family, are the most significant legal challenges to slavery in the Atlantic world after the Somerset case. This history is transformatively significant. So I wanted that to be at the heart of this story as well, and so that these families, their experience would be shared, would be taught, and also that schools would be equipped to teach this history with reference to specific people, with reference to specific families, particular families, rather than the institutionalized approach of slavery as this generic, abstract institution. And instead, we need to teach it and reconcile our history and ourselves to the truth of American history. And so, I'm going to pause there, Shannon, and see if there are questions and comments, and I hope we can have some further discussion about all of this, about the freedom suits and about their meaning in American history.
All right. Thank you ever so much, Dr. Thomas. We will now open the floor to questions. I see that Rosalind Miller has raised her hand. Please, Rosalind, ask your question.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for this discussion. This has been great. I'm going to pose a question to you that I was going to pose to Professor Gollar. In your academic communities, what fears do you have as far as the times we're in right now, that our access to this information, like the website that you posted that I've already gone into, that we're going to be limited, or a lot of access to this information or the ability to teach it is going to be taken away? And within your communities, is there a concerted pushback, or are people just kind of being complacent about it?
Yes.
Thank you.
That is a really important question. I think our communities in the American Historical Association, for example, are speaking out now to challenge restrictions on teaching and to challenge narratives about teaching that somehow distort what teachers are really working with and doing when they introduce these concepts, the concepts we've been talking about today. So I have every confidence that the Organization of American Historians, the American Historical Association, some of the biggest scholarly associations that represent historians, academics, but not solely academics. I mean, historians across lots of different independent historians. Anybody can join the American Historical Association, so please do. We are seeing efforts around the United States to restrict what subjects may be taught or how subjects may be taught, and the scholarly organizations are standing up against those restrictions, and I think we're going to see more of that. It's really important that we do. One of the things, let me give you two quick resources. One both in the chat. These are just things I'm involved with personally, so they might be helpful in addressing this question. One is the Animating History Project. We are creating a whole series of animated films based on the freedom suits, including a feature film that is called The Bell Affair. It's on Amazon Prime, and you can access it in lots of different ways. But also a series of short films like the one called Anna, about a freedom suit in Washington, D.C. in 1815. And the point of this is to really create new forms of historical interpretation that can be circulated and shared and taught. And so the short film, Anna, which is only 10 minutes, and it's set in Washington, D.C., and it's a very important freedom case. That short film is being taught widely in schools around the United States, and I think it raises so many of these questions and these histories in a way that is accessible to students, that emotionally involves them and that also ignites their historical imagination about the past. And so the Animating History Project is one way I'm trying to put into circulation, Rosalind, interpretations that can be used in many different contexts. The Bell Affair has been shown at family reunions. It's been shown at church gatherings. And the same is true for our shorts. The other is the U.S. Law and Race Initiative at Nebraska. We are creating an open educational resource, okay? So in direct response to the concerns, Rosalind, you raised about the current environment, what we're going to try to do is, through this open educational resource, equip teachers and scholars and students with the materials that reveal the complexity of the American past on all of these questions. And so, I think what we need to do, among other things, is put these documents into the world, these histories into the world, these stories, including family stories, including descendants' family stories. Part of the U.S. Law and Race Project is to collect descendants' stories in Washington, D.C. We're working with the Institute for Public Policy and History, Politics, Policy, and History, which is directed by the former mayor of Washington, D.C., Sharon Pratt. I was just on a call with her yesterday about the community conversations that she is holding with descendants of families in Washington, D.C., and then the storytelling around their experience related to American law and race are part of this collection, this open educational resource. So, so I think we really need to do three things. You know, one, with the animations, create stories that young people which sparks their historical imagination. Two, the open educational resource to have a library, in essence, of all of this material for people to have access to freely and openly. And then third, we need our scholarly associations, the American Historical Association, the Organization of American Historians, and there are many, many others. There's a Catholic History Association that's part of the American Historical Association. It's an affiliate. Our associations really need at this moment to be heard, visible and heard with legislators and in communities. You can see, I'll stop there. This is so important right now.
Well, thank you so much for that. And what can the general public do to support those efforts? What's the best thing for us to do?
You know, oh boy, that's a great question. I think locally, I really think locally, being active school boards, you know, being really present in the sort of school board discussion and local political activity to be sure to carry that story that history history is evidence and interpretation, and it's and all of these subjects in American history need to be taught, you know, and shared, and that's just that at the local level would really help, because I think a lot of this is happening at the local level, and that's one of the difficulties for associations like the AHA. It's so localized.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yes, we have a number of other questions. I see in the chat that Ellen Fernandez Soccer has asked a question. Let me read it for you here. So
Yeah. Okay, I see it, Shannon. I'll go ahead and read it if that's all right. Was there a point when the family testimony was accepted rather than disallowed in the filing of freedom suits? Yes. So in the 1790s in Maryland, free Black testimony was allowed in court. And actually, free Black men were voting in Maryland until 1800. Okay, so families who sued for freedom and won, the men in those families were suddenly voters in Maryland elections. And I talk about this in the book a little bit, how the freedom suits in fact then led to Black voting, and Black voting was then restricted in 1800 and 1801. And as these freedom suits became even more powerful and significant in Maryland. But your question is exactly right. The courts, judges then began to interpret, interpret law to disallow Black testimony. Okay, and that happened right around 1800, after a whole series of freedom suits had been successful, not entirely on the basis of free Black testimony, but free Black testimony was part of those. And the key family, the Butler family, the first series of freedom suits by the Butlers, it was free Black families. But even in the Queen family, Simon Queen testifies in court in Simon Queen is the free black witness testifying in the Queen family suit. But yes, they are disallowed, but anywhere between 1800 and 1810, as judges begin to write rules that restrict free black testimony.
Okay, we have another question
Yes.
from Delbra Brown.
Yes, Delbra.
Delbra, are you still here?
I am, thank you. So my question is really around, you mentioned about documenting our family's history. So during the pandemic, after 30 years at that time of researching my family's history, I wanted to get all that information out of my head and at least document it. So I published my first couple of books. And then because we were still in the pandemic, I turned it into a documentary. So I was able to work with the local actors and get my community involved in helping me to turn that story into a documentary. So there's so many ways to chronicle our story, books, different things like that. And I wanted to make it oral, so I did the documentary. So I did submit because I felt, of course, it was an amazing story, like we all feel about our history, that I felt that I wanted to see if I could get it turned into a film of some sort. So I submitted it to feature films. So my question to you would be, in the presence of something that has become a film work, do you have any sources where we can submit these because mainstream TV or media may not be interested in this story, but somewhere that is looking for our stories that have been documented and done this, where can we submit that?
Yeah. Wow, that is, Delbra, sorry, that is that's a really good question. I mean, local film festivals is one place we've had some success. You know, Prince George's County Film Festival is a really great new film festival that is accepts all different genres. So even short films, there's a vibrant community of short film festivals. So Delbra, I think, you know, if you've got, I don't know what your locality is, but, you know, some kind of local film festival, especially in the short category, if you can take your documentary and move it into a short, we have found that's, you know, much more open, because often it's the feature length that's the competition part. And for the short film category, a lot of local film festivals will really just show the shorts in a sequence, one after the other, you know, and it's a really good way. The last one, I mean, I went to one we did in Omaha Film Festival in Nebraska. We showed a recent short in this series from Animating History, and there were 300 people in the audience, you know, and there was a whole Q&A afterwards with the audience. So I think short film and film festivals is one way. And then the other, if I may, I would just say, you know, as I mentioned, we're building this OER, this open educational resource. And if your work touches on storytelling and the law in any way, we would be interested in talking with you. So
I think I have a piece. My family members were actually involved in trying to get reparations for slaves. So there was a whole documented story around that. And I tried to look for documentations from the National Archives so that I could see what they actually submitted. That legally, that's the only thing that I noted that I can speak to what you're speaking of. The film festival piece, problem, my documentary was 2 hours long, because I did everything. I did the documents and all the stories my grandmother shared. I wanted to show proof that I had actually found that information. But once you submit it and once that hype is done, I really wanted to be more of an educational forum, more of that piece that you're speaking about that is around education than it is about the film side of it.
Right.
So if you have an email or something, I definitely would love to connect with you, because I think I would love to hear something more about this, the whole the slaves looking to try to get freedom, and that whole those tens of years that was involved in that, and then it just died. I think that would be a fascinating story as well. So thank you.
Absolutely. Let's connect, please.
All right, we have just a few minutes left for questions. My guest, you have a question?
Yes. Hi, Dr. Thomas. Question for you. When you were doing your research about the freedom suits in the district court, did you look at any of the freedom suits in other jurisdictions where there were other Catholic orders who were enslaving people or prominent Catholic families? I ask because I have seen other enslaved people with surnames associated with those enslaved by the Jesuits also filing freedom lawsuits in places like Missouri. One is noted as Louisa Mahoney.
Yes.
Same name as my ancestor, but it's not the same person. So just wanted to know if you took a look at that.
Yeah. Yes, that's a great question to I did as best I could. There's not I went to New Orleans as part of this research, and I went to the court records in Iberville and Ascension Parish, the local court records in Iberville and Ascension Parish. I searched them thoroughly for freedom suits. There were some freedom suits, but they were not from the families, at least that I could tell, from Maryland. The Missouri records have largely been digitized and are now, actually, they're even more digitized than when I did this research. So now you can really search county by county the Missouri digital local court records. They're far ahead of any state, I would say, Missouri right now, in terms of their digitization of records. And I've been working with those because I'm trying to write a new book on Dred Scott, and really following Dred Scott to as one of the litigants, as perhaps the archetypal litigant in American history, suing a slaveholder, suing Irene Emerson, and eventually John F.A. Sanford. But Dred Scott was taken by Emerson to all the way up the upper Mississippi, and in 1837 is on the very border of the then United States. It's a story that involves the expansion of the United States in ways that I don't think have quite realized. So I have been looking at the Missouri records closely, and I would say, at this point, you actually could use that online search tool to really look at, because there are 5,000 that I've found cases with enslaved people in them in Missouri. Now, they're not all freedom suits, but a larger number than we might realize were freedom suits. So
yes. So thank you for that. I mean, I would definitely like to follow up with you as you research your book on Dred Scott. I'm finding that a number of folks did sue, and they were filing lawsuits against the now Daughters of Charity in Missouri. And these are enslaved people who are descendant of Maryland. So I'll be sending you.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Great. Yes. Thank you.
Right. We have another question from Abigail Jefferson.
Thank you so much, Mr. Thomas. I appreciate the work that you're doing. I am a Queen descendant. My great-great-grandparents are. I wanted to find out from you how much influence, if any, people like yourselves, scholars, researchers, professors, on local school departments like curriculum and instruction and social studies department teaching this type of information, and even the way in which you're suggesting it be taught. What type of influence do you all have on these school departments? And the reason why I ask is because I've been told point blank by PG school department from their curriculum and instruction department, as well as social studies, that this is not history that's actually even being taught, and it doesn't even seem to be their priority.
Right. Well, thank you for the question. Well, I hope we would have influence. I think, where I've seen the most influence is in the development of state standards. And now Virginia, my home state, just had a struggle over state standards and what would be in the state standards for history and how those would be created, formulated, and then disseminated. I think certainly from my own experience, the creation of state standards and being able to include, let's say, the history of particular enslaved families, the history of the use of the law, the legal questions that surrounded slavery in the early republic. Those kinds of concepts, we need to get those in the state standards because then the textbooks will follow, and then the localities will be expected to teach to those general topics. Where we need help is in really advocacy around the whole state standards issues in state after state, because essentially, because these are state by state, every state is on a different timeline. Like I can just speak about Nebraska, that next year is when their state standards revision takes place. I was part of the advisory team for the standards in Nebraska that are currently being used, that include a lot of important references in history to the history of slavery and law and Native American history, for example. So as those state standards are revised, that is a critical moment when these histories can be silenced or stricken or broadened to include, as you pointed out, subjects that currently in PG County maybe they're not teaching. So it's hard when at the county level, they're trying to teach to a curriculum, and obviously they only have room for whatever they're assigned to teach. And so we really want to work with states on state standards. And I think the American Historical Association has really been doing that, been really involved in trying to help navigate state standards revision. Did that answer your question, Abigail?
It does and it doesn't. And
Okay.
In terms of how frequently do they revise state standards? Because I know these state standards are already on the books.
Yeah.
And who out there is advocating for this particular history, especially to get into the local history, especially in Maryland in particular?
Right. I don't know the answer to the last part of the question, and I don't know Maryland state standards, but the typical cycle is 7 years on those. So we need to pay attention to when Maryland standards are going to be revised or adjusted, and then work on that. But I would hope that we could have more influence at the local level, as you suggested. Especially one thing I would say, I don't know if you all in Maryland. Hold on a second. I wanted to highlight the performance that is coming to the Prince George's County Center for the Performing Arts. It's based on my book, but it's a play written by Psalm 24, and it went on the stage in Prince George's County last year, and there's now going to be a second run. And so one of the things that we're trying to organize for this is this is Descendants, Queen family and Mahoney family descendants voices in the play, and then a Bell family descendants from Ball Ground Plantation in Vicksburg, outside of Vicksburg, Mississippi. Their voices are in the play. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Out of the Vineyard, this performance that Joe's Movement Emporium has helped launch. But I'm really excited that there's going to be a second run. It's in February 19th to the 26th. And what's also exciting, and we're trying to get this organized, is to have one of the performances be filmed for Maryland Public Television. And if we can get the performance filmed for Maryland Public Television, then this extraordinary performance of the experience of history, and all of us, meaning us collectively, including me, as descendants of this history and of families involved in this history, would be available for K-12 teaching in a way that it just isn't right now. So it's a pretty important February second run for Out of the Vineyard, and I hope we can get it filmed, and I hope then, Abigail, that it's like available on Maryland Public Television, for example.
Thank you.
All right, we are actually running a little behind. We were supposed to have a break at 1:40, but we have 2 minutes left until the next presentation. So if you want to use that for questions, we can continue the conversation until 1:45.
Sure.
I see
I'll be
that.
very brief. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Amy Speckart and then Patricia Bayonne-Johnson have questions for you.
Hi, I'll try to keep this short. I appreciate seeing Dr. Thomas here. I've been researching Maryland freedom suits, and I've been wondering if I see them popping up. There's a literature on freedom suits also in Louisiana and Missouri,
Right.
which all have significant Catholic populations. So I've been
Yes.
wondering, is there a connection between Catholicism, the presence of Catholicism, or a significant religious minority, and freedom suits? Is there some? Because Virginia is just like a stone's throw away from Maryland. So why is that one reason why Maryland? Anyway, and
yeah,
is there some Catholic connection here?
Amy, I'm not sure. I mean, one of the things that I think is important, again, is the intergenerational part of the families that we're talking about had largely been in Maryland for up to 5 generations, and I mean, certainly at White Marsh or at some of the, long before the 1838 trauma of the sale to Louisiana, I don't want to say those families were entirely intact and connected, but I think they very much were in ways that enabled these freedom suits, you know. And I just don't know if that's the case in Louisiana or in Missouri, but in Maryland, I think that's a big part of it, because it's Mary Queen's story that, despite the Jesuits sending her to Bohemia Manor on the Eastern Shore, it's Mary Queen's story at White Marsh and the family network at White Marsh that continues over 2 generations to then be able to say, this is the history. This is and she was a free woman, you know? And so, and then the minute the courts are open to this, they bring those freedom suits. So I'm not answering your question because I just don't know, but it's a really important question to ask.
All right. Well, thank you ever so much.
Thank
We
you,
are
everyone. Yeah.
now out of
Thank you.
time, but we do thank you ever so much for your presentation and for answering our questions. We do encourage our audience to contact you with their remaining questions. We now will move to the next presentation, the final one of the day. Thank you ever so much.